Hello, boring dreamers. Today, we are going to wrap ourselves in wool, crawl into a wooden box, and invite the cows into the living room as we explore the surprisingly brilliant ways medieval people stayed warm without electricity. We often picture the past as a miserable, shivering existence, but the truth is your ancestors were masters of thermal engineering who used physics, biology, and a lot of mud to create cozy microclimates that would make a modern green architect jealous. You see your thermostat set to 72 degrees, but let's be honest, you probably won't survive this. Mostly because your body has forgotten how to regulate its own temperature without a fleece vest and a heated car seat. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Also, go ahead and let me know in the comments where you re-watching from and what time it is there. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You open your eyes, but the world is still pitch black. For a moment, you aren't sure if you are awake or dead. The silence is heavy, broken only by the rhythmic, rasping sound of someone snoring next to you, your brother, or maybe your father. It's hard to tell in the tangle of limbs. You try to take a deep breath, and that is when the reality hits you. The air inside your nose freezes. It feels like you just inhaled broken glass. You exhale, and even in the darkness, you can feel the cloud of steam billowing from your lips, settling on your eyelashes as tiny crystals of ice. You are inside your house, but your house is currently colder than a modern refrigerator. You are lying on a mattress stuffed with straw, covered by a rough woolen blanket that weighs about 20 pounds. Underneath this heavy pile, your body is warm, a little pocket of tropical heat generated by your metabolism and the shared warmth of the three other people squeezed into the bed with you. But the moment you shift your arm, a gap opens in the covers. The cold air rushes in like a physical attack, biting at your skin with teeth of frost. You yelp silently and yank the wool back up to your chin. This is the reality of the frozen morning. In the modern world, you wake up and the temperature is the same as when you went to sleep. Your thermostat cycles on and off, burning natural gas or electricity to keep the air at a perfect, steady equilibrium. But here, in the year 1350, your house is not a climate-controlled box. It is a sieve. The fire in the central hearth, which was roaring when you went to sleep, has died down to a pile of gray, sullen embers. Without that active heat source, the thermal battle was lost hours ago. The stone walls, if you have them, have sucked the heat out of the air. The gaps in the wooden shutters have let the wind whistle through. You are essentially camping, but with better furniture. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that you are living through the Little Ice Age. From roughly 1300 to 1850, temperatures in Europe and North America dropped significantly. Winters were longer, harsher, and deadlier. The Thames River in London froze solid enough to hold fairs with elephants walking on the ice. The cold you feel isn't just a chilly morning. It is a global climatic shift that has turned your world into a freezer. You aren't just fighting the weather. You are fighting the planet. You lie there, dreading the inevitable. You have to get up. You have to pee. And the chamber pot is across the room. You summon your courage. You throw off the heavy covers. The cold hits you like a hammer. You scramble out of bed, your bare feet hitting the packed earth floor. It is freezing literally. The ground sucks the heat right out of your soles. You rush to the bucket in the corner. And here you encounter the first test of the day. You look into the bucket. The liquid inside, yesterday's waste, is solid. This brings us to a quirky, fringe tidbit. The piss pot forecast. In many rural households, the state of the chamber pot was the primary weather instrument. If the urine had a thin layer of ice, it was a normal winter day. If it was frozen solid to the bottom, it was a stay-in-bed day. If the pot had cracked from the expansion of the ice, it was a survival situation. Yours is frozen, but the pot is intact, so you have to work. You shiver violently. This shivering is actually your first line of defense, your muscles rapidly contracting to generate kinetic heat. But you can't shiver forever. You need to restart the external engine. You stumble toward the hearth in the center of the room. You grab the iron poker and stir the ash. Deep down, buried under the gray dust, there is a faint red glow, the seed of fire. You gently blow on it. The ash flies up into your face, blinding you, but the glow brightens. You feed it a handful of dry straw, then a twig. A flame jumps up. You hold your hands out to it, almost touching the fire. The heat is intense on your palms, but your back is still freezing. This is the paradox of medieval heating. You are always simultaneously burning and freezing. You are a rotisserie chicken of thermal discomfort. As the fire grows, you look around your cottage. To a modern structural engineer, this place is a disaster. There is no fiberglass insulation in the walls. There is no double-paned glass. There is no vapor barrier. The walls are made of sticks and mud. The roof is made of dead grass. And yet, as the fire builds, something miraculous happens. The room starts to hold the heat. The air doesn't just escape immediately. You realize that while this house looks primitive, it is actually a highly sophisticated thermal machine. Every material in here, from the straw above your head to the dirt under your feet, was chosen for a specific physical property. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate, the thermal comfort theory. Historians and anthropologists argue about whether medieval people actually felt the cold the way we do. Some argue that through physiological adaptation, your body contained more brown fat, a type of fat that generates heat, and your circulation was more efficient. You might have been biologically tougher, capable of tolerating a 50-degree living room without complaining. Others argue that, no, humans are tropical apes, and you were just miserable all the time. Reading the diaries of the era, filled with complaints about chilblains and numbness, suggests the latter. You weren't a superhuman. You were just a suffering human with good wool. You dress quickly, layering linen under wool. The linen wicks sweat, which makes you cold, and the wool traps air. You put on your boots. The fire is crackling now, sending a plume of smoke up toward the roof. And that is where your eyes linger. The roof. In a modern house, heat rises, hits the drywall ceiling, and dissipates into the vented attic, wasted. But here, you look up and see a dark, textured, chaotic mass of vegetation. It looks like a giant bird's nest overturned on your house. It is thatch. And unbeknownst to you, you are standing under one of the most effective insulators ever invented by mankind. You might think it's just straw, but it is actually a high-tech matrix of hollow tubes designed to trap air. You realize that the reason you didn't freeze to death last night wasn't just the blankets. It was the hat your house is wearing. You grab a piece of bread and prepare to step outside, but before you face the wind, you take a moment to appreciate the genius of the dead grass above your head. You crane your neck back, looking up into the dark, cavernous space above the rafters. To a modern eye, accustomed to flat white ceilings and recessed lighting, this looks like a chaotic mess of agriculture. It looks like a haystack has exploded and landed on top of your living room. But you are looking at a marvel of bioengineering that beats modern fiberglass in both style and sustainability. You are looking at the thatch. In the modern world, a roof is a thin skin. It's a layer of plywood, a layer of tar paper, and a layer of asphalt shingles or slate. It is maybe an inch thick. It is designed to shed water, which it does well, but thermally, it is a disaster. In the summer, your attic turns into an oven. In the winter, it turns into a freezer. You have to pump fluffy pink fiberglass between the joists just to compensate for how terrible the roof itself is at holding temperature. But your medieval roof is not a skin, it is a blanket. A very, very thick blanket. You step outside for a moment to gather wood, and you look at the exterior of your cottage. The roof is a beast. It is nearly a foot thick, sometimes 2 feet, in cooler climates like Scotland or Scandinavia. It is made of water reed, wheat straw, or heather, bundled tightly together. Here is the genius of it. Every single stalk of that straw is a hollow tube. You pick up a piece of dry straw from the ground. You look at the end. It's a tiny pipe. Inside that pipe is air. When you bundle thousands of these pipes together, you are creating a massive honeycomb of dead air space. Physics tells us that air is a terrible conductor of heat, which makes it a great insulator, provided the air doesn't move. If the air moves, it carries heat away, convection. But inside the tiny stalk of straw, the air is trapped. It can't move. It sits there, creating a thermal barrier. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that a well-maintained thatch roof has an R value, insulation value, of roughly R20 to R25. To put that in perspective, a standard modern 2x4 wall with pink fiberglass insulation is about R13. A modern asphalt shingle roof has an R value of basically 0. Your medieval peasant roof is twice as efficient as the walls of a suburban house built in 1990. You aren't shivering because the roof is bad. You're shivering because you don't have central heating. If you did have a radiator in here, this house would stay warm for days. You go back inside and listen. Or rather, you listen to the lack of sound. It's beginning to drizzle outside, a cold, sleety rain. In a modern house with a tin roof, or even thin shingles, you would hear the rat-a-tat-tat of the drops. Here, silence. The thick mat of straw absorbs the sound waves just as well as it absorbs the heat. It is acoustically dead. It creates a sense of womb-like isolation from the elements. You are safe in your burrow. But looking up, you notice something else. The thatch isn't golden yellow like on a postcard. It is black. It is coated in a shiny, tar-like substance. This brings us to a fascinating scholarly debate, the smoke preservation hypothesis. Historians and archaeologists have long noted that medieval cottages often lacked chimneys. The smoke from the central hearth just drifted up and filtered out through the thatch. For a long time, this was viewed as primitive and unhealthy, which, for your lungs, it was. But recently, experts have argued that this was a deliberate preservation strategy. The smoke contained phenols and tars that coated the straw, killing bugs, preventing rot, and essentially curing the roof like a ham. There are examples of smoke-blackened thatch surviving in old buildings for 600 years, preserved by the very fires that warmed the occupants. By building a chimney, you might have improved your air quality, but you ruined your roof's lifespan. You watch a puff of smoke drift lazily upward. It hangs in the rafters, forming a thermal layer of its own. It's a smog blanket, keeping the heat down where you are. However, living under a pile of dry grass does have its downsides. You hear a rustle above you. Scritch, scratch. It isn't a ghost, it's a rat, or a mouse, or a bird. This leads to a quirky fringe tidbit, the bedtime canopy. You might have heard the old myth that canopy beds were invented to stop snakes and rats falling from the thatch onto your face while you slept. While raining cats and dogs is likely an etymological myth, the reality of falling vermin was very real. Thatch is a warm, dry ecosystem. Birds nest in it. Mice burrow in it. Spiders love it. In the winter, every small creature in the forest wants to live in your roof because it works so well. The canopy over the Lord's bed wasn't just for decoration. It was a poop shield. You, the peasant, do not have a canopy. You just learn to sleep with your mouth closed. There is also the terrifying issue of fire. You look at the hearth. You look at the straw. You realize you are living inside a giant tinderbox. If a spark flies up and catches a dry piece of hanging straw, the whole roof goes up in minutes. In many medieval villages, There was a communal tool kept near the church or the village green. It looked like a giant pole with a massive iron hook on the end. This was the thatch hook. If a house caught fire, neighbors wouldn't try to put it out. Water is heavy and hard to carry. They would run over with the hook, snag the burning roof, and physically rip the entire thatch structure off the house to save the wooden timber frame and prevent the fire from spreading to the neighbor's roof. You are living in a house designed to be decapitated in an emergency. But despite the rats and the fire risk, you wouldn't trade this roof for slate. Slate is cold, stone is cold, tile is cold. Those materials suck the heat out of the room. Thatch reflects it back down. You stand directly under the thickest part of the roof. You can actually feel a difference in temperature compared to standing near the door. The heat from your body rises, hits the trapped air in the straw, and stays there. It is a passive heat recycler. You realize that modern green building certification often praises biophilic design and natural materials. You are living in the ultimate green building. Your roof grew in a field 2 miles away. It was harvested by hand. When it eventually rots in 30 years, it will turn into compost for the garden. It has a net zero carbon footprint, costs $0, just labor, and keeps you warmer than the rich merchant's slate-roof townhouse in the city. The merchant might look down on your hovel, but come January, when he is shivering in his drafty stone hall, you will be toasty warm under your compost pile. But a roof is only one part of the equation. Heat doesn't just go up, it also goes out. You look at the walls surrounding you. They aren't made of stone blocks, and they certainly aren't made of brick. They look rough, textured, and slightly lumpy, like they were sculpted by hand. And in fact, they were. You are about to examine the second layer of your defense system. You are about to look at the mud. To the untrained eye, your walls look like dirt. But to the thermal engineer, they are a masterpiece of composite material science. They are the wattle and daub, and they are about to teach you a lesson in thermal mass. You pull your hand away from the fire, which is roasting your palms, and place it against the wall of your cottage. You expect it to be freezing. After all, outside the wind is howling, and the frost is thick on the ground. If this were a stone castle, the kind the nobility live in this wall would be sucking the heat out of your body faster than a vampire drains blood. Stone is a thermal bridge. It conducts cold from the outside right into your living room. But your wall isn't stone. It feels cool, yes, but not icy. It feels dense. It feels solid. And if you lean against it, you realize something strange. It is slowly radiating a gentle, retained warmth, like a stone picked up from a riverbank on a sunny day. You are touching wattle and daub. To the modern eye, looking at historical reenactments or movies, these peasant cottages look like they are made of dirt. And they are. But calling it dirt is an insult to the chemistry involved. You are living inside a composite material that rivals modern reinforced concrete in its ingenuity, if not its smell. The wattle is the skeleton. If you were to peel back the surface, you would see a woven basket. Vertical wooden stakes, usually oak, are driven into the ground, and flexible green branches, hazel or willow, known as withies, are woven horizontally between them. It looks like a giant, coarse fence. This provides the tensile strength. It helps the house flex in the wind without cracking. The daub is the muscle, and this is where things get messy. To make the daub, you, or more likely, your entire village in a communal daubing party, dug a pit in the yard. You filled it with the local subsoil, clay. You added water. Then you added sand for aggregate. Then you added straw or hay for binding, like the rebar in concrete. And then, the secret ingredient, dung. You threw in shovelfuls of cow manure. Fresh, steaming, fibrous manure. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that manure wasn't just cheap filler. It was a chemical plasticizer. The enzymes and proteins in the animal waste broke down the clay, making it stickier and more malleable. It also added millions of tiny fibers from the undigested grass, which stopped the mud from cracking as it dried. You are literally living in a house held together by poop. But the magic isn't in the ingredients. It's in the physics. Wattle and Daub is a master of thermal mass. Modern insulation, like the pink fiberglass in your attic or the thatch on your roof, is designed to stop heat transfer. It traps air. Wattle and Daub works differently. It is heavy condense. It doesn't stop heat. It absorbs it. During the day, when the sun hits the outside of your house, or when your hearth fire is roaring, the thick mud walls absorb that thermal energy. They soak it up like a sponge soaking up water. Because the walls are so thick, often 6 to 10 inches, it takes hours for that heat to travel through the material. By the time the sun goes down and the outside air drops below freezing, the heat the wall absorbed at noon is just reaching the inside surface. Your walls become slow-release radiators. They give back the heat they stole during the day. You are living inside a rechargeable heat battery. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit, the daubing cat. You might wonder how you get the mud onto the woven sticks. You don't use a trowel. You use a cat. This was the medieval slang for a specific lump of daub mixture, roughly the size and shape of a sleeping cat. You would roll this mixture into a ball in your hands, and then throw it hard at the wattle skeleton. The force of the impact drove the mud into the crevices of the woven wood, keying it in. Building a house involved days of pelting your walls with mudcats. If the mix was right, it stuck. If it was too wet, it slid off, a sliding cat, and you had to start over. You look at the surface of the wall. It isn't brown mud anymore. It has been whitewashed with lime. This lime wash isn't just for aesthetics. Lime is alkaline. It is a natural antiseptic. By painting your poop walls with lime every spring, you are sterilizing your home. The lime kills lice, fleas, and bacteria on contact. It also forms a hard, calcified crust that seals the daub against rain. It is a breathable Gore-Tex layer for your house. However, living in a mud house creates a scholarly headache for future historians. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate, the impermanent architecture paradox. For decades, archaeologists struggled to find evidence of early medieval peasant villages. They found the stone churches and the castles, but the houses were missing. They assumed this meant peasants were nomadic or lived in tents. The reality? Wattle and daub is entirely biodegradable. When a peasant house was abandoned, the roof rotted, the walls melted back into mud, and the wood decomposed. The house literally returned to the earth. Historians now argue that medieval architecture wasn't primitive because it didn't last. It was regenerative. It was the ultimate zero-waste housing. You borrowed the materials from the land, and when you were done, you gave them back. But right now, you aren't worried about the archaeological record. You are worried about the draft. While the wattle and daub is excellent at thermal mass, it has a weakness. As the wood dries, it shrinks. As the house settles, cracks form where the mud meets the timber frame. You can feel a thin, needle-like stream of cold air hitting your shoulder. It's coming from a crack near the window frame. You grab a handful of raw wool or moss and jam it into the crack. You are caulking your house. Maintenance is a daily ritual. Your house is a living thing that shrinks, swells, and moves with the seasons. You have to tend to it like a garden. So, you have the thatch, insulation, above you. You have the wattle and daub, thermal mass, around you. You are creating a thermal envelope. But there is one surface in the room that betrays you. One surface that sucks the life out of you faster than any other. You look down. Your feet are numb. You are standing on packed earth. The ground is an infinite heat sink. The earth is roughly 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius, year-round. That sounds mild, but when you are trying to stay warm, 50 degrees is a vampire. It will pull heat out of your body forever and never get full. You can't insulate the floor with thatch. You'd trip. You can't pave it with mud. It's already dirt. You need a layer that separates you from the cold earth, something that can take the abuse of muddy boots, spilled ale, and chicken poop, but still keep your toes from turning black. You need to carpet the world, but since you don't have nylon, you are going to the swamp. You are going to harvest the rush. You look down at your bare feet. They are turning a shade of pale blue that is usually reserved for corpses or smurfs. You wiggle your toes. They feel stiff, like frozen sausages. The wattle and daub walls are holding the heat in, and the thatch roof is stopping it from rising, but you have a massive thermal leak right underneath you. You are standing on the earth. In a modern home, the foundation is insulated. There is a layer of foam or concrete between the subfloor and the ground. But in your cottage, the floor is the ground. It is packed dirt. And as any physicist will tell you, the Earth is a magnificent heat sink. It is effectively infinite. You can pump heat into the ground all day long, and the planet will just shrug and absorb it, staying a stubborn, chilly 50 degrees Fahrenheit, 10 degrees Celsius. If you stand on this dirt all winter, the cold will travel up your legs, into your core, and lower your body temperature until you are shivering uncontrollably. You need a thermal break. You need to elevate yourself. You grab a sickle and head to the nearby marsh or riverbank. You are looking for rushes. These are long, green, reed-like plants, juncus. They are stiff, durable, and most importantly, hollow. Just like the straw on your roof, the rush is a natural tube of trapped air. You cut huge bundles of them. You drag them back to the cottage, and then you re-carpet the living room. There are two ways to do this. If you are feeling fancy or have a lot of free time, you weave them into mats. These mats are thick, springy, and portable. You can roll them up and shake them out. But let's be honest, you are a busy peasant. You probably use the loose strewing method. You take the green rushes and simply throw them on the floor. You scatter them until they form a layer about 2 or 3 inches thick. You step onto the fresh layer. Crunch, squish. It feels soft. It feels springy. But most importantly, it feels warm. You have lifted your feet off the heat sink. You are now walking on a cushion of air. A thermal conductivity breaks. Your toes start to pink up again. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that strewn rushes were the universal flooring of medieval Europe, found in the humblest peasant huts and the grandest royal palaces. Even the King of England walked on grass. The difference was just how often they changed it. In a wealthy home, the top layer might be refreshed every week. In your home, maybe twice a year. And this is where the insulation solution becomes a hygiene horror story. When you spill your ale, it goes into the rushes. When the baby spits up, into the rushes. When the dog has an accident, into the rushes. You don't mop the floor. You just sprinkle a fresh layer of green grass on top of the mess. Over the winter, the floor level actually rises. You are building a geological sediment of domestic life. This brings us to a quirky, fringe tidbit, the Erasmus abomination. The famous Dutch scholar, Desiderius Erasmus, visited England in the 16th century and was horrified by the rush floors. He wrote a scathing letter describing them. The bottom layer is left undisturbed, sometimes for 20 years, harboring expectoration, vomiting, the leakage of dogs and men, ale droppings, scraps of fish, and other abominations not fit to be mentioned. He blamed these filthy floors for the plagues that swept through the cities. He wasn't wrong. You are essentially insulating your house with a compost pile that you walk on. But to you, in the depths of winter, Erasmus is just a whining intellectual. You care about the smell, sure, but you have a solution for that too. You reach into your pouch and pull out a handful of dried herbs. Meadowsweet, lavender, hyssop, maybe some sage. You sprinkle these strewing herbs over the rushes. When you walk on them, Your heavy boots crush the dried leaves, releasing a burst of essential oils. It is a motion-activated air freshener. Every time you cross the room, the scent of summer meadow wafts up to mask the scent of, well, the abominations underneath. Meadowsweet, Filipendula ulmaria, was the favorite of Queen Elizabeth I because it smelled like almonds. You probably use wild mint because it grows in a ditch. It smells sharp and clean, cutting through the smoke and the damp. But there is another hidden benefit to this herbal carpet. Many of these plants, like wormwood, tansy, and fleabane, are natural insecticides. By walking on them and releasing their oils, you are fumigating your house from the ankles down. You are trying to convince the fleas that this warm, grassy floor is not a good place to raise a family. You usually fail, but the effort counts. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate, the sweeping controversy. Archaeologists love digging up medieval floors because primary refuse, stuff dropped and left there, tells them exactly what people ate and used. But there is a debate about how clean these floors actually were. Some historians argue that Erasmus was exaggerating for dramatic effect. He was a bit of a germaphobe. They point to medieval instructional texts that tell servants to sweep daily. But sweeping loose grass is a nightmare. You sweep away the floor with the dirt. It is likely that spot cleaning was the norm, and the full mucking out only happened during the spring cleaning ritual. Hence the term spring cleaning. It was the only time you opened the doors and shoveled out the winter's compost. You walk across the room to grab a wooden bowl. The floor feels soft and forgiving under your feet. It creates a deadened, cozy acoustic in the room, absorbing the echo of the stone and the wood. You are warm. The roof is trapping heat. The walls are holding heat. The floor is blocking the cold. But you have a problem. The space is big, relatively. The fire in the hearth is small, and it is getting dark. The temperature outside is dropping to numbers that would make a polar bear reconsider his life choices. You need a heat source that is bigger than a fire. You need a heat source that runs 24/7, doesn't require chopping wood, and outputs roughly 1,000 to 3,000 BTUs per hour continuously. You don't have a furnace. You don't have a radiator. But you do have a cow. You look toward the end of the cottage. There is no wall there. There is just a low partition. Beyond it, in the gloom, you see a pair of large, wet eyes reflecting the firelight. You hear a heavy, rhythmic chewing sound. You are about to engage in the ultimate symbiotic living arrangement. You are about to sleep with your food. You are about to invite the barnyard into the bedroom. Not because you love animals, but because a 1,000-pound cow is a biological space heater that runs on grass and outputs pure warmth. It's time to embrace the house barn. You walk across the soft, herb-scented rush mats toward the darker end of the cottage. In a modern house, you might be walking toward the garage or the utility room. But here, the utility room is living and breathing. It is staring at you with large, wet, indifferent eyes. You cross a low wooden partition, hardly a wall, more like a fence, and the temperature noticeably jumps. It feels humid, heavy, and thick. The smell changes instantly from the sharp scent of wood smoke and dried mint to the rich, pungent, ammonia-heavy aroma of wet hay and manure. Welcome to the byre. You are standing in a longhouse, or Wohnstellhaus if you are in Germany. This is the standard architectural model for rural living across much of medieval Europe. The concept is simple. You live on one end, and your farm animals live on the other. There is no door between you. There is no airlock. You share the same roof, the same air, and the same heat. You reach out and pat the flank of your prized possession, the milk cow. Her coat is coarse and warm. In fact, she feels like a radiator that has been left on high. To you, she is Bessie. To a physicist, she is a biological furnace with a heat output of roughly 3,000 to 4,000 BTUs, British thermal units, per hour. In the modern world, We spend a fortune on biomass boilers that burn wood pellets to heat water. You have the original biomass boiler. You feed grass into the front end of the cow, and she converts it into heat and milk and fertilizer with incredible efficiency. The secret isn't just her body heat, it's her digestion. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that a cow is a walking fermentation tank. The cow's first stomach, the rumen, holds about 40 to 50 gallons of chewing cud. Inside that tank, billions of bacteria are breaking down cellulose in an exothermic heat-releasing reaction. You lean against the wooden post of the stall. It is surprisingly comfortable. The air here is definitely warmer than near the door. The combined body heat of the livestock can raise the indoor temperature of the cottage by 5 to 10 degrees Fahrenheit. In the dead of winter, that is the difference between shivering all night and sleeping soundly. But this arrangement requires some clever engineering. You look down at the floor. It is sloped. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit, the gutter logic. In a traditional longhouse, the floor is never flat. The human end is built slightly higher than the animal end. A drainage channel, or gutter, runs down the center or along the side of the animal section, leading out a hole in the wall. Gravity is your sanitation department. When the cows relieve themselves, which they do copiously, all night, the liquid flows away from your bed and out of the house. If you built it wrong, if the slope was off, you would wake up in a puddle of liquid fertilizer. You are living on the high ground of hygiene. You toss a fresh armful of hay into the manger. The cow chews rhythmically. Crunch, grind, crunch. It is a soothing white noise sound, like a very slow, very wet metronome. However, living with livestock sparks a fierce scholarly debate, the security versus warmth argument. Why did medieval peasants live with their animals? For a long time, historians assumed it was purely for heat. It makes thermodynamic sense. But recently, some anthropologists have argued that warmth was just a happy side effect. The real reason was security. In the Middle Ages, a cow was your most valuable asset. It was your tractor, your milk factory, and your savings account. Cattle rustling was rampant. If you left your cow in a separate barn outside, a thief could steal your livelihood in the middle of the night, and you'd never hear a thing. By keeping the cow in the living room, you ensured that if anyone wanted to steal her, they'd have to step over you to do it. You are sleeping with your car keys, essentially. But there is a trade-off. A smelly, dangerous trade-off. The air in the house is warm, yes, but it is also damp. Animals breathe out moisture. The walls of the byre glisten with condensation. And then there are the flies. Even in winter, the warmth of the manure breeds insects. And where there are insects, there is disease. Living in close quarters with animals creates a zoonotic highway. Tuberculosis, brucellosis, and influenza often jumped from animals to humans in these cozy shared spaces. You are warm, but you are coughing. You watch the steam rise from the cow's nostrils. It drifts up toward the thatch, joining the smoke from your fire. You realize that your definition of clean is vastly different from a modern human's. To a modern person, a clean house is sterile. To you, a clean house is one where the manure has been shoveled into the gutter today. You have developed nose blindness. You don't smell the ammonia anymore. It just smells like home. There is also the carbon dioxide factor. The animals produce CO2 and methane. In a tightly sealed modern house, this would be deadly. But remember your roof. The thatch breathes. The gaps in the wattle breathe. Your house is leaky enough to prevent you from asphyxiating on cow farts, but insulated enough to keep the heat. It is a delicate balance of ventilation. You finish tending the animals. You pat the cow on the head one last time. "Good night, heater," you whisper. You walk back up the slope to the human end of the house. The air feels slightly fresher here, though still tinged with the barnyard scent. The fire is banking down. The cold is pressing against the walls outside, hunting for a way in. But you have one more line of defense. You are tired, you want to sleep. But you aren't just going to lie down on a mattress in the open room. That would be drafty. The heat from the cow and the fire dissipates into the large space. You want to concentrate that heat. You want to trap it in a tiny personal volume of air. You walk toward a piece of furniture that looks like a coffin standing on its end, or perhaps a wardrobe. It has solid wooden doors. It is your bed, but it isn't a platform. It's a room within a room. You are about to enter the box bed. You are about to seal yourself inside a wooden cupboard to hibernate like a bear. You turn away from the cow, who is happily chewing her cud in the gloom, and face the furniture that dominates the human side of the room. In a modern bedroom, the bed is an island, a mattress on a frame, exposed on all sides to the circulating air. If the room is cold, the bed is cold. You rely on layers of blankets to trap heat directly against your skin. But here, you don't trust the room. The room is vast, drafty, and filled with the ghosts of the winter wind. So, you don't sleep in the room. You sleep in a cupboard. You stand before a large, freestanding wooden cabinet. It looks like a heavy wardrobe, or an armoire, intricately carved with geometric patterns, or perhaps a crude religious symbol to ward off nightmares. It has solid oak doors that slide or swing shut. This is the box bed, or lit close if you are in France. Bedstee if you are in the Netherlands. You open the doors. Inside, it isn't a shelf for clothes. It is a cozy, dark cave filled with bedding. You climb in. The mattress is raised high off the ground, sometimes chest high. This serves two purposes. It keeps you out of the cold draft that crawls along the floor. The floor is lava principle we discussed with the rushes. And it keeps you at eye level with the warmer air rising from the fire. You crawl onto the mattress. It is stuffed with straw, or if you had a good harvest, goose feathers. You pull the heavy woolen blankets up. And then you do the most important thing. You reach out and pull the wooden door shut. Click. You are now sealed inside a wooden box. It is pitch black. To a modern claustrophobe, this is a nightmare. It feels like you have voluntarily climbed into a coffin. But to you, a medieval peasant, this is the ultimate luxury. You are creating a microclimate. The physics here are simple but brilliant. The cottage might be 400 square feet with a high vaulted roof. Heating that entire volume of air to a comfortable 70 degrees with a small fire and a cow is impossible. But the interior of the box bed is only about 60 cubic feet. Your body is a radiator constantly outputting heat at 98.6 degrees Fahrenheit. Inside the large room, that heat dissipates instantly. Inside the box, the heat is trapped. The thick wooden panels insulate you from the cold room, and the small volume of air inside the box warms up rapidly. Within 10 minutes, the temperature inside your wooden cave can be 10 or 15 degrees warmer than the room outside. You are baking yourself in your own body heat. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that box beds were standard furniture across northern Europe for centuries, from the remote farms of Scotland to the fishing villages of Brittany. They were so effective that they persisted well into the 20th century. In some regions of France, people were still sleeping in lit clothes until the 1970s. They were the original, tiny home living a bedroom within a bedroom that solved the heating crisis without burning a single extra log. You adjust your pillow a long, firm bolster and settle in. But you don't lie flat. You prop yourself up, almost into a sitting position. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit, the dead man's pose myth. If you visit museums and look at medieval beds, you'll notice they are surprisingly short often, less than 5 feet long. For years, tour guides told people this was because medieval people were tiny. They weren't, they were slightly shorter, but not hobbits. The real reason the beds were short is that people slept semi-upright. Why? There are two theories. One is medical. They believed that lying flat caused blood to rush to the head, potentially causing a stroke, or that it allowed humors to pool in the chest, causing pneumonia. The other is superstitious. Only corpses lie flat. To lie flat was to invite death. By sleeping propped up, you were signaling to the Grim Reaper that you are still on the clock. As you sit there in the dark, warming up, you realize another benefit of the box: privacy. In a one-room cottage where you live with your parents, your children, and a cow, privacy is non-existent. The box bed is the only place in the world where you can be alone, or alone with your spouse. It is an architectural solution to a social problem. Inside the box, the world disappears. You can't see the drying laundry. You can't see the cow staring at you. You can't see the dying fire. However, sealing yourself in a box does have a downside: ventilation. If the doors are too tight, you run the risk of stale air or rebreathed air. You are essentially hotboxing yourself with carbon dioxide. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate: the hygiene versus heat conflict. In the late 19th and early 20th centuries, public health officials declared war on the box bed. They called them incubators of disease. They argued that the lack of airflow promoted tuberculosis and trapped germs in the bedding. They launched campaigns to smash the box beds and force peasants to sleep in open iron bedsteads. It was a clash between modern germ theory and ancient thermal wisdom. The doctors were right about the germs, but they didn't have to sleep in an unheated stone cottage in February. The peasants fought back, clinging to their cupboards because they preferred being warm and germy to being sterile and frozen. To compromise, you notice that the doors of your bed aren't solid. They have slats or spindles or intricate fretwork carved into the top panels. This is beautiful, yes, but it's primarily functional. It allows just enough oxygen exchange to keep you from suffocating, while keeping the bulk of the warm air inside. It is a primitive havoc vent. You snuggle deeper into the feathers. The air inside the box is getting toasty. It smells of dried lavender from the mattress stuffing, old wood, and unwashed wool. It is a heavy, soporific smell. The sounds of the house are muffled. The cow's chewing is a distant rumble. The wind outside is just a faint vibration in the wood. You feel incredibly safe. There is another, more primal reason for the box bed: protection. In rural areas, wolves were a real threat. While a wolf probably wouldn't get into your house, stray dogs or even rats might. A box bed is a fortress. A mother could put her baby in the box, close the lower half of the door, and know that the child couldn't wander into the fire, and the pigs couldn't wander into the child. It was a giant playpen with a roof. But you weren't alone in here. Box beds were rarely for one person. They were communal spaces. You might be sharing this 5-foot box with 2 siblings, or a spouse and an infant. The insulation isn't just the wood, it's the other bodies. You feel the warmth of the person next to you. It radiates through their nightshirt. You are functioning like a pack of puppies, piling together to conserve energy. You close your eyes. The darkness is absolute. There is no standby light from a TV, no glow from a street lamp outside, just the velvety, warm blackness of the oak cabinet. You have solved the problem of the cold room by ignoring the room entirely. You have shrunk your world down to a size your body can manage. But wait. What about the walls outside the box? You know that the stone walls of the cottage are cold. And even though you are in the box, you know that cold stone radiates a chill that seems to penetrate everything. It sucks the energy out of the room. You can't insulate the whole house with wood paneling, too expensive. So you look in your mind's eye, or perhaps you peeked before you closed the doors, at the walls of the main room. They aren't bare stone. They are dressed. You have hung the medieval equivalent of fleece blankets on the walls. They look like decorations to the modern eye tapestries depicting hunts or battles, or maybe just rough painted canvas. But they are actually one of the most effective draft stoppers ever invented. You are about to explore the world of woolen walls. You are going to learn why a tapestry is an art. It's insulation. You push open the slats of your box bed just a crack. The air in the room is still chilly, though not as biting as it was near the floor. You peer out into the gloom of the cottage. The firelight flickers, casting long, dancing shadows against the walls. If your walls were bare stone or plaster, those shadows would be sharp and cold. But your walls look soft. They ripple slightly in the draft. They look fuzzy. You have insulated your home with woolen walls. In the modern world, we think of tapestries as priceless art objects that hang in the Louvre or the Met, usually behind velvet ropes and alarmed glass. We stare at the faded colors and think, wow, look at that craftsmanship. But to a medieval person, hanging a tapestry for the art is like buying a down comforter solely because you like the pattern on the fabric. It's nice, sure, but the point is to stop freezing to death. You step out of the bed, briefly, to adjust the hanging near the window. It is a heavy, coarse sheet of wool, painted with a crude scene of a stag hunt, or perhaps a biblical flood. It smells of dust, wood smoke, and lanolin. You run your hand over the stone wall behind the fabric. It is icy wet. It feels like the inside of a cave. It sucks the heat right out of your fingertips. Now, you touch the fabric itself. It feels neutral. It feels dry. This is the physics of radiant barriers. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that stone castles and cottages are magnificent thermal sponges. They suck heat out of the air, but they also suck heat out of you. Even if the air temperature in the room is 70 degrees, if you stand next to a 40-degree stone wall, you will feel cold. Why? Because your warm body radiates infrared energy toward the cold surface. The wall is literally draining your battery from across the room. By hanging a heavy woolen curtain over the stone, you break that line of sight. Your body radiates heat to the wool. The wool, being an insulator, warms up quickly and radiates heat back to you. You have stopped the stone vampire from feeding on your thermal energy. But the real magic isn't the wool itself. It's what is behind the wool. You lift the corner of the hanging. There is a gap maybe 2 or 3 inches between the fabric and the stone wall. This gap contains stagnant air. As we learned with the thatch and the rushes, air that doesn't move is an incredible insulator. The cold air radiating from the stone gets trapped in this pocket behind the tapestry. It can't easily mix with the warm air in the room because the heavy wool blocks the airflow. You have created a double glazing effect for your entire wall. You have built a thermos flask inside your living room. This brings us to a fascinating scholarly debate: the acoustic versus thermal intent. Did medieval lords cover their great halls and tapestries because they were cold, or because stone rooms sound terrible? A bare stone hall echoes like a gymnasium. It's loud, harsh, and impossible to hold a conversation in. Tapestries dampen the sound, making the room quiet and intimate. Some historians argue that the acoustic benefit was the primary driver for the wealthy, while the thermal benefit was just a bonus. But given that they also hung these cloths in bedrooms, which are generally quiet, but don't freeze to death, argument usually wins out. But you, the peasant, can't afford a genuine Arras tapestry woven with silk and gold thread. Those cost more than your entire village. So you use painted cloths. These were the budget-friendly alternative. They were sheets of canvas or coarse linen, stretched on wooden frames or hung from hooks, and painted with distemper, a glue-based paint. They were the poor man's wallpaper. They blocked the drafts just as well as the silk ones, even if they didn't look quite as fancy. However, having a gap behind your walls creates a unique problem. It creates a hiding spot. This leads to a quirky fringe tidbit: the Polonius proof. The most famous piece of evidence for how medieval insulation worked comes from Shakespeare. In Hamlet, the character Polonius hides behind the arras, a tapestry, to spy on Hamlet, and Hamlet stabs him through the fabric. This tells us two things about historical insulation. The fabric was thick and opaque enough to hide a full-grown man. The air gap behind it was large enough to fit a full-grown man. We aren't talking about a thin sheet pinned to the drywall. We are talking about a heavy curtain hanging several inches or even a foot off the wall. That is a massive insulation cavity. It's practically a walk-in closet of dead air. You tuck the edge of your painted cloth back against the wall. It stops a draft that was whistling through a crack in the wattle and daub. But there is another aspect to these wall hangings: portability. You are used to houses where the walls are permanent. But in the Middle Ages, furniture and insulation were mobile. The rich didn't live in one castle. They moved between them to let the sanitation recover, i.e., let the poop pits decompose and to eat the local food stores. When the Earl moved, he took his walls with him. The walls, tapestries, were taken down, rolled up, and put in wagons. When he arrived at the next cold, empty castle, the servants would rush in and hang the walls up. Instantly, the cold stone box became a warm, colorful, acoustically dampened home. It was pop-up architecture. You, the peasant, might not move as much, but you certainly take your blankets and hangings with you if you move cottages. Your insulation is your luggage. You look at the scene painted on your cloth. Maybe it's a picture of Saint Christopher carrying the Christ child. In a world without books, TV, or internet, this wall is your entertainment. It is your Netflix. You stare at the same image every night as you fall asleep. It becomes part of your psyche. The insulation isn't just warming your body, it's furnishing your mind. But wool has one more property that makes it superior to modern fiberglass. It manages moisture. Your cottage is damp. We've established that. There is a cow breathing in the corner. You are boiling soup. It's raining outside. In a modern house with plastic vapor barriers, this moisture would condense on the walls and grow black mold. But wool is hygroscopic. It can absorb up to 30% of its weight in water vapor without feeling wet. It pulls the humidity out of the air, storing it in the fibers. And here is the thermodynamic magic. When wool absorbs moisture, it releases a tiny amount of heat. It is an exothermic reaction. Your wall hangings are actually generating heat just by absorbing the dampness of the room. They are chemically active climate control devices. You run your hand over the cloth again. It feels dry. It feels capable. It is a shield against the stone. But as effective as the thatch, the mud, the rushes, and the tapestries are, they are all passive. They only trap heat. They don't create it. The cow creates heat. Yes. The fire creates heat. Yes. But there is a heat source in this room that is more efficient, more adaptable, and more comforting than any of those. It burns at 98.6 degrees. It is self-regulating, and you have several of them right here in the room with you. You look back at the box bed. You see the lump of blankets moving. You hear a sleepy mumble. You realize that the best way to stay warm isn't to insulate the walls. It's to insulate the people. And the best insulation for a person ... is another person. You are about to dive into the pile. You are about to discover why the concept of personal space is a luxury you can't afford, and why sleeping alone in the Middle Ages was considered a death sentence. You look at the box bed again. The wooden doors are slightly ajar, and from the darkness inside, you hear the rhythmic breathing of your family. You are tired, you are cold, and you know that the warmest place in the entire universe is right in the middle of that pile of humanity. In the modern world, we are obsessed with the king-size mattress. We want space. We want sleep independence. We want to be able to roll over without touching another living soul. If a hotel asks you to share a bed with a stranger, you write a 1-star review. But in the Middle Ages, sleeping alone wasn't a luxury. It was a waste of fuel. You climb back into the box. You don't take your own spot. You wedge yourself into the collective lump. You are practicing biothermal aggregation. Here is the physics. A resting human body generates roughly 100 watts of thermal power. That is the equivalent of an old-school incandescent light bulb. If you have 5 people in this bed, you, your spouse, 2 kids, and maybe an aunt, you have a 500-watt heater running under the covers. But it's not just about generating heat. It's about reducing surface area. When you sleep alone, your entire body surface is exposed to the cold air, even under blankets. You are radiating heat from your head, your toes, your back. When you sleep in a puppy pile, you press your back against your warm brother. You tuck your cold feet under your sister's legs. You effectively reduce your exposed surface area by 50% or more. You become one giant multi-headed organism with a very high core temperature and a very small skin-to-air ratio. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that communal sleeping was the absolute norm for 99% of human history. It wasn't just families. If you traveled and stayed at an inn, you didn't rent a room. You rented half a bed. You would regularly wake up next to a complete stranger, a merchant, a soldier, a pilgrim. Samuel Pepys, the famous diarist, often recorded sleeping with male friends or servants for warmth. It wasn't sexual. It was thermal survival. To refuse to share a bed was seen as antisocial and arrogant. You shimmy down until you are shoulder to shoulder with your kin. It's cramped. It smells of onions and unwashed linen. Someone's knee is digging into your kidney. But within minutes, the shivering stops. The heat is aggressive. It penetrates your bones. This brings us to a quirky, fringe tidbit, the bundling board. This need for shared heat created a social dilemma for courting teenagers. If a young man came to visit a young woman in the winter, they couldn't sit in the freezing parlor. They had to go to bed to stay warm. But their parents didn't want any premarital funny business. The solution? Bundling. The couple was allowed to get into bed together, fully clothed, sometimes with a heavy wooden plank, the bundling board, placed between them. Or, in extreme cases, the girl was sewn into a sack. They could talk and share body heat, but the insulation of the plank kept their virtue intact. It was the ultimate friend zone barrier. However, this intimacy sparks a fierce scholarly debate. The invention of privacy. Historians like Felipe Arraiz have argued that the concept of privacy, the need to be alone to be yourself, is a modern invention, born in the 18th century with the rise of hallways and separate bedrooms. The medieval mind didn't crave solitude the way we do. They found comfort in the crowd. Silence and isolation were associated with exile or madness. To be alone was to be vulnerable. To be packed in a bed was to be safe. You feel the slow, steady heartbeat of the person next to you. It synchronizes with yours. The CO2 levels in the box bed rise, making you groggy and deepening your sleep. But let's say it's daytime. You can't stay in bed forever, as much as you'd like to. You have to get up, churn butter, mend tools, and cook pottage. You have to leave the 500-watt human heater. You step out into the room. The fire in the central hearth has been built up again. It is blazing, but a fire in the middle of a room is surprisingly inefficient. If you stand 5 feet away, your face burns while your back freezes. The hot air goes straight up into the thatch, bypassing you entirely. You are heating the birds on the roof, not the people in the room. You need to capture that radiant heat before it escapes. You need to create a room inside the fireplace. You look at the massive stone archway dominating the wall. It isn't just a hole for smoke. It is a piece of furniture. It is the inglenook. You are about to discover why the best seat in the house is literally inside the chimney. You extract yourself from the warm tangle of limbs in the box bed and step onto the rush-covered floor. It is daytime now, or at least the gray, weak light filtering through the oiled parchment window suggests it is. The daily chores await. The cottage is chilly. The heat from the cow and the sleeping bodies has dissipated into the rafters. The only source of intense heat is the fire. In the earliest medieval houses, the fire was just a bonfire in the middle of the room with a hole in the roof. This was democratic, everyone could sit around it, but thermally stupid. The smoke filled the room, giving everyone eye infections, and the heat went straight up, creating a narrow column of warmth, while the corners of the room remained freezing. But your cottage is more advanced. You have a hooded hearth built against a side wall. And more importantly, you have an inglenook. You walk toward the fireplace. It is massive. The stone arch spans 6 or 7 feet. Above it, a plaster or wattle hood funnels the smoke up the chimney. But the genius isn't the chimney. It's the space under the arch. You step over the hearthstone. You are now standing inside the fireplace. To a modern person, this sounds suicidal. We are taught to put a screen in front of the fire and sit on a sofa 10 feet away. But in the Middle Ages, the fireplace was a room within a room. On either side of the burning logs, built into the stone structure itself, are 2 small benches. You sit down on one of them. You are literally sitting inside the chimney breast. This is the inglenook, from ingle meaning fire and nook meaning corner. The physics here is delightful. You are surrounded on 3 sides by thermal mass. The stone walls behind you and to your side have been absorbing the fire's heat for hours. They are radiating it back into your ribs. The fire itself is 3 feet away, blasting your shins with infrared radiation. The hood above you traps a pocket of hot air before it sucks it up the flue. You are in a convection oven. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that the inglenook was the warmest place in the medieval world. It could be 80 degrees in the nook, while the rest of the room was 45 degrees. Because of this, the seats in the nook were strictly reserved. In a peasant cottage, these spots belonged to the elderly, the grandparents whose circulation was failing, or the sick. To offer the chimney corner to a guest was the highest honor you could bestow. It was like giving them the keys to your car. You sit there, peeling turnips or mending a tunic. The smoke is rising just inches from your nose, but the draft of the chimney pulls it away, mostly. You are comfortable. You are cooking your dinner and warming your body simultaneously. This brings us to a fascinating scholarly debate, the social hearth shift. Archaeologists track a massive shift in social behavior when houses moved from central open hearths to wall fireplaces. With a central fire, everyone sat in a circle facing each other. It was communal. With a wall fireplace and inglenooks, the heat became directional. It created a hierarchy. The patriarch got the nook. The servants were pushed to the cold outer ring. Some sociologists argue that the invention of the chimney helped dismantle the communal tribalism of the Middle Ages and paved the way for nuclear family privacy. The fire stopped being a campfire and started being a TV, something you watched from a designated seat. But there is a danger to the inglenook. You are very, very close to the flame. This leads to a quirky fringe tidbit, the petticoat peril. For women wearing long, heavy woolen skirts, the inglenook was a death trap. Historical coroners' rolls are full of misadventure verdicts where women simply turned around too quickly. Their hem caught an ember, and they went up in flames. Because wool smolders rather than flares, you might not notice until your clothes were literally burning off your body. The hearth rug, originally often a heavy, damp skin, was partly there to smother these small fires. You are sitting in the most comfortable and most flammable seat in the house. You lean your head back against the warm stone. It feels good. It feels like a hot stone massage. But you can't stay in the nook all day. The grandparents need their spot back, or the fire gets too hot to bear. You have to move out into the main room to eat your pottage at the table. A table is in the middle of the room. It is drafty there. The wind whistles through the door cracks. The cold air falls from the uninsulated parts of the ceiling. You need a chair. But a modern chair, a spindly thing with 4 legs and an open back, is useless here. If you sit on a stool, your back freezes. So you sit on a piece of furniture that looks like a church pew mixed with a fortress. You sit on the settle. This is the high back bench, and it is about to teach you that furniture isn't just for sitting. It is a mobile wall that you can deploy against the wind. You reluctantly leave the stone embrace of the inglenook. Your grandmother needs the seat, or perhaps the fire has died down just enough that you need to move closer to the table to eat your dinner. You step out of the chimney's microclimate and into the main room. Instantly, you feel it. A draft. It's an invisible river of cold air flowing from the cracks in the door, sweeping across the floor and hitting you right in the kidneys. In a modern house, we hate drafts, but we ignore them because our central heating overpowers them. In a medieval house, a draft is a thief. It steals the heat you just spent hours accumulating. You can't caulk every crack. The house moves too much. So if you can't stop the wind from entering the room, you have to stop it from hitting you. You sit down on the settle. To a modern eye, a settle looks like an uncomfortable church pew. It is a wooden bench with a very high back, often 5 or 6 feet high, and solid wooden panels on the sides, called wings. It has no cushions. It is hard, upright, and rigid. You look at it and think, my spine hurts just looking at that. But you sit down, and suddenly the draft disappears. The settle is not just a chair. It is a mobile wall. By placing it with its back to the door and its front facing the fire, you have created a physical barrier against the cold air currents circulating in the room. The high back blocks the wind. The side wings trap the radiant heat coming from the fireplace, creating a warm pocket of still air around your body. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that the high-backed settle is the direct ancestor of the modern sofa, but its design was purely thermal, not ergonomic. In colonial America and medieval Europe, the wings on the side worked for resting your head. They were heat collectors. They functioned exactly like the reflector shields you see on camping stoves. They captured the infrared radiation from the fire and focused it onto the person sitting on the bench. You are sitting inside a solar oven, powered by oak logs. You slide over to make room for your brother. The bench is long enough for 3 or 4 people. You sit shoulder to shoulder, biothermal aggregation again, facing the fire with a solid wall of oak behind you. You are eating your pottage, feeling warm and secure. But then, you hear a strange sound coming from under your butt. Bleat. You ignore it and keep eating. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit, the lamb box. Many settles were built with a hinged seat. Underneath the seat wasn't just empty space, it was a storage chest. In the spring, during lambing season, the shepherd, your father, would bring weak or freezing newborn lambs into the kitchen to save them from the snow. Where do you put a baby lamb to keep it warm? You put it inside the bench. A body heat of the family sitting on top of the seat, combined with the proximity to the fire, turned the box underneath into an incubator. You are literally sitting on a box of livestock. If the lambs were healthy, the box might store firewood, salt, or linens, keeping them bone dry in the damp house. The settle is the ultimate piece of defensive furniture. It acknowledges that the house is trying to kill you, and it offers you a wooden shield. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate. The architecture versus furniture line. Architectural historians often argue that in the Middle Ages, the line between house and furniture was blurry. A box bed is a room. A settle is a wall. A tapestry is insulation. Furniture wasn't decorative. It was structural. As houses became better sealed and heated in the 18th and 19th centuries, furniture backs got lower. The open-plan living we love today is only possible because we don't need our sofa to protect us from the front door. The decline of the high-backed bench is a direct graph of the rise of insulation. But right now, you need that high back. The wind outside is picking up. You can hear it howling around the eaves of the thatch. The temperature is dropping fast. You know that the wattle and daub walls are thick, but even they have a limit. If the wind blows hard enough, it strips the heat off the outside of the wall faster than the fire can push it through from the inside. This is the wind chill factor applied to a building. You need to stop the wind from hitting the house altogether. You need an external buffer. You finish your meal and grab a wooden shovel. It sounds counterintuitive, but you are going to go outside into the blizzard to make your house warmer. You are going to use the very thing that is freezing you, the snow, to save you. You are about to engage in snow banking. In the modern world, we shovel the snow away from the house to protect the foundation. In the Middle Ages, you shovel the snow against the house. You are about to build an igloo around your cottage. You leave the warm wooden embrace of the settle and wrap your wool cloak tight around your shoulders. You grab the wooden shovel standing by the door, a single piece of carved oak, worn smooth by generations of hands. You take a deep breath and push open the heavy door. The wind hits you like a physical blow. It is a whiteout. The snow is falling so hard you can barely see the barn where the rest of the animals are hunkered down. In a modern context, this is a homeowner's nightmare. You would be worrying about the weight on the roof, the ice dams in the gutters, and the moisture seeping into the basement. You would grab a shovel and frantically clear a path away from the foundation to keep the house dry. But you, the medieval peasant, do the exact opposite. You stick your shovel into a drift, lift a heavy load of white powder, and dump it directly against the wall of your house. You are snow banking. You work your way around the perimeter of the cottage, piling the snow higher and higher. You pack it down with the back of the shovel. You build a sloping ramp of snow that reaches halfway up the wattle and daub walls, maybe even up to the windowsills. To a modern neighbor, you look insane. You are burying your own house. But you are actually applying one of the most effective insulating materials in nature. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that fresh, uncompacted snow is roughly 90% trapped air. It is a fluffy matrix of ice crystals. Just like the straw in your thatch or the hollow rushes on your floor, snow is a poor conductor of heat. In construction terms, snow has an insulating value of about R1 per inch. If you pile a 3-foot bank of snow against your wall, you are adding an R36 layer of insulation to the exterior of your home. That is better than the walls of most modern eco-homes. You are essentially wrapping your cottage in a temporary styrofoam cooler. This is the igloo effect. Inside an igloo, the temperature can be 60 degrees warmer than the outside air, purely using body heat and the insulating power of ice. By banking your cottage, you stop the wind from stripping heat off the mud walls. You seal the cracks where the draft was getting in. You create a thermal buffer zone. But there is a dangerous trade-off. This leads to a fierce scholarly debate, the rot versus warmth calculation. Architectural historians and dendrochronologists, tree ring scientists, often find evidence of severe rot in the lower timbers of medieval buildings. For years, they blamed rising damp from the ground. But many now argue that the practice of snow banking, while it saved lives in the winter-destroyed houses in the spring. When the snow melts, it saturates the wattle and daub. It rots the oak sill beams. It turns the wall into mush. So the peasant faced a brutal choice. Do I keep the house dry and freeze to death tonight? Or do I stay warm tonight and let the house rot next April? You choose warmth. You can fix a rotten beam in the summer. You can't fix a frozen corpse. But what if it doesn't snow? What if it's just a dry, biting, freezing cold? You still bank the house. But you don't use snow. You use the midden. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit. The insulating dung heap. In many coastal or northern communities where snow was unreliable, but wind was constant, peasants would pile their refuse straw, manure, bracken, and household trash against the windward wall of the house. This wasn't just lazy sanitation. It was biothermal insulation. As the midden heap decomposes, the bacteria break down the organic matter. This reaction is exothermic. A compost pile can reach internal temperatures of D-160 degrees Fahrenheit, Y-70 degrees Celsius. By piling the dung against your wall, you weren't just blocking the wind. You were literally pressing a giant, fermenting heating pad against your living room. Your house smelled terrible, but that wall was warm to the touch. You finish your work. You are sweating under your wool. Despite the blizzard, the house now looks like a small hillock in the landscape, half buried in white. You stomp your boots on the threshold and slip back inside. The difference is immediate. The sharp drafts that were cutting across the floor have vanished. The room feels still. The wind chill has been neutralized. The house feels tighter, quieter, and smaller. You hang your wet cloak on a peg near the fire to dry. The steam rises from the wool, adding humidity to the air, which actually helps the air hold heat better. Humid air feels warmer than dry air. But now that you have blocked the drafts and buried the walls, you have a new problem. It is dark in here. You have small openings in the walls. Wind eyes, the origin of the word, window. In the summer, you leave them open to let in the breeze and the light. But in the winter, an open window is a hole in your thermal armor. It lets out all the heat you just worked so hard to trap. You could close the wooden shutters. But then you are sitting in pitch darkness at 2 p.m. You can't afford to burn candles all day. Wax is expensive. You need light, but you can't afford the heat loss. You don't have glass. Glass is for cathedrals and kings. A single pane of clear glass costs more than your cow. So you need a material that is translucent, waterproof, and windproof. You need a membrane. You walk over to the window frame. Stretched across it is not glass, but something yellowish, taut, and slightly greasy. It glows with a warm, amber light. You are about to look through the oiled paper. You are about to see how a piece of old sheepskin or parchment can act as the poor man as double glazing. You stand in the center of your cottage, which now feels less like a house and more like a hibernation den. You have thatched the roof, mudded the walls, carpeted the floor, and buried the exterior in a rampart of snow. The drafts have stopped screaming. They are now just whispering. But as you look around, you realize the consequence of your fortification. It is the middle of the day, yet your home is plunged into a twilight gloom. By sealing the cracks and burying the walls, you have blocked out the sun. You need light. But in the thermal war of the Middle Ages, light is usually synonymous with cold. An open hole in the wall, a wind eye or vindauga in Old Norse, lets in the sun, but it also lets in the blizzard. You walk toward the south-facing wall. There is a wooden frame set into the wattle and daub, but it isn't open, and it certainly isn't glazed with clear glass. It is covered with a taut, yellowish, translucent skin. It glows with a warm, amber luminescence, like a giant lantern hung on the wall. You are looking through oiled paper, or perhaps oiled linen, or parchment. You reach out and tap it. Thump, thump. It sounds like a drum. In fact, that is essentially what it is, a membrane stretched tight over a wooden hoop. To make this, you took a sheet of high-quality linen or paper, if you could afford the latter, which was becoming more common by the late Middle Ages. You soaked it in linseed oil, animal fat, or beeswax. The physics of this grease window are surprisingly complex. Raw paper or cloth is opaque because the fibers scatter the light. But when you saturate the fibers with oil, the oil fills the microscopic air gaps between the fibers. The refractive index of the oil matches the cellulose of the paper. Suddenly, the material stops scattering light and starts transmitting it. You have turned a rag into a window, but the oil does something else. It creates a waterproof, hydrophobic seal. The rain hits this window and beads up, rolling off just like it does on a duck's back. If you left the cloth dry, it would soak up the rain, rot, and let the wind blow right through the weave. The fat makes it an air barrier. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that glass windows were effectively non-existent for the common person until the 17th century. The Romans had glass, but the technology to make large, flat, clear panes was lost or prohibitively expensive. Medieval glass was crown glass, made by spinning a blob of molten glass into a disc. It was thick, wavy, and full of bubbles. It was reserved for cathedrals and the castles of the ultra-wealthy. For 1,000 years, Europe looked at the world through a layer of grease. You lean in closer. You can't see out. There is no view. You can see the shadow of a tree branch swaying in the wind, or the dark blur of a person walking past, but you cannot see the landscape. This creates a psychological sensation that is entirely alien to the modern mind. We build picture windows to bring the outside in. We want to see the snow falling. But your window separates you from the world. It turns the harsh, gray winter light into a soft, diffused, golden glow. It makes the interior of the cottage feel warm, even if the temperature is low. It is a natural Instagram filter for your life. But thermally, your grease window is actually superior to the rich man's glass. The king's window is made of hundreds of tiny pieces of glass held together by lead strips, cames. Lead is soft. In a high wind, the window rattles boughs and leaks air like a sieve. It is a terrible insulator. Your window is a single, continuous sheet. It is flexible. When the wind blows, your window doesn't shatter. It bows inward, absorbing the pressure, then snaps back. You have a storm window that heals itself. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit, the horn pane. If you wanted the deluxe version of the non-glass window, you didn't use paper. You used the cowl. Specifically, you used the horns. Manufacturers would take the horns of cattle, boil them in water until they turned into a soft jelly, slit them open, and roll them flat. When they dried, they became thin, semi-transparent sheets of plastic-like material. These horn panes were durable, waterproof, and couldn't be poked through by a stray branch. However, the lack of a view creates a tension that historians love to argue about. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate, the interiority hypothesis. Some cultural historians argue that the inward-looking nature of the medieval mind wasn't just religious. It was architectural. Because windows were translucent, but not transparent, people spent their lives in spaces where the outside world was a blur of shadows. You couldn't people watch from your living room. You were forced to focus on the interior of the hearth, the family, the soul. The invention of clear glass in the Renaissance coincided with the rise of perspective in art and the outward expansion of exploration. Did clear glass change human consciousness? Did seeing the world clearly make us want to conquer it? You watch a bead of condensation run down the inside of the oiled parchment. It collects on the sill. You wipe it away with a rag. The light in the room is fading. The amber glow is turning gray, then black. The sun is setting. The temperature drops instantly. The igloo effect and the wattle battery are fighting a losing battle against the night. The fire is your only sun now. You are about to go to sleep. You will climb into your box bed, pile in with your family, and shut the doors. But there is one part of your body that you cannot bury in the pile. One part of you that must remain exposed to the air so you can breathe. Your head. And as any parent will tell you, you lose 80% of your heat through your head. That statistic is a myth, by the way, but the heat loss is still significant. If you leave your bald spot exposed to the 40-degree air inside the box bed, you will wake up with a stiff neck and a cold nose. You need to insulate your personal chimney. You need to dress for bed. You reach for a piece of clothing that, in the modern world, is a comedy prop for Ebenezer Scrooge or a sleepy cartoon character. But for you, it is a survival tool. You are putting on the nightcap. You stand by the side of the box bed, watching your family squeeze into the warm, dark interior. The heavy oak doors are ready to be pulled shut. The fire in the inglenook has burned down to a pile of sullen red coals, casting a weak, dying glow across the room. The temperature is dropping fast. You can see your breath again. You are stripped down to your linen shift, your underwear layer. You shiver. The air feels like it has teeth. You know that once you get under the covers, your body heat will create a warm microclimate. But there is a flaw in the system. To breathe, you have to keep your face exposed. And where your face goes, your head goes. In the modern world, we sleep with our heads naked. We rely on central heating to keep the air around our pillows at a comfortable 68 degrees. But here, the air temperature inside the box bed, and certainly outside of it, might drop to 45 or 50 degrees. If you leave your head bare, it acts like a radiator vent. Your warm blood pumps up from your heart, circulates through your scalp to keep your brain alive, and then radiates that precious heat straight out into the freezing darkness. You need a lid for your radiator. You reach for a garment that modern culture has turned into a joke. You pick up the nightcap. To you, this isn't the floppy, comical hat worn by Ebenezer Scrooge or a sleeping cartoon bear. It is a piece of precision thermal gear. It is a cone of thick knitted wool or double-layered linen that fits snugly over your skull. You pull it on. It covers your ears. It covers your forehead down to the eyebrows. You tie the strings, the points, tightly under your chin. Instantly, you feel the difference. It's like putting a cork in a bottle. The heat that was streaming off the top of your head is trapped. Your ears, which were starting to sting, begin to throb with warmth. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that for centuries, the nightcap was as essential as underwear. Everyone wore them. Men wore the conical jelly bag style. Women wore close-fitting coifs or bonnets. To sleep without one was considered reckless. Medical texts of the time warned that cold air entering the ears would chill the brain and cause rheum, a generic term for mucus and congestion. You aren't just wearing this to stay warm. You are wearing it to stop your brain from catching a cold. You adjust the tassel at the end of the cone. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit, the pom-pom radar. You might think the fluffy ball on the end of a winter hat or nightcap is just decoration. But historical design theorists argue it had a practical function, especially for sailors and peasants living in cramped spaces with low beams. The pom-pom is a whiskers sensor. If you stand up suddenly in the dark, the soft ball hits the low timber rafter first, giving you a split-second warning to duck before you smash your skull against the oak beam. In a cottage where the ceiling might be only 6 feet high near the eaves, your silly hat is a collision avoidance system. You tighten the chin strap. The cap feels secure. It hugs your jaw. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate, the brain snot theory. Why were medieval people so obsessed with keeping their heads warm? It stems from the Galenic theory of humors. They believed that the brain was the coldest organ in the body, a condenser for the hot blood of the heart. They also believed that mucus, snot, was actually waste product produced by the brain. If your head got too cold, the brain would congeal and produce excess mucus, which would then drip down into your chest and kill you, pneumonia. So, the nightcap wasn't just for comfort. It was an attempt to keep the brain's consistency correct. They were literally trying to stop their brains from melting into snot. You look at the box bed. It's full. The biothermal pile has reached maximum capacity with your parents and the smaller children. There is no room for you. You are the teenager, or the apprentice, or the unmarried uncle. You have been displaced. You could sleep on the settled bench, but the fire is dying, and the floor drafts are picking up. You could sleep with the cow, but the byre is wet and muddy. You need a place that naturally captures the last rising vestiges of heat in the house. You need to go up. You look toward the rafters. Spanning the space above the main room is a rough wooden platform. It isn't a second floor. It's just a storage shelf for grain, hay, and dusty tools. It is dark, full of spiders, and clouded with the lingering smoke from the hearth. But you know, thanks to the laws of thermodynamics, that heat rises. That platform is the hottest real estate in the building. You grab your blanket. You climb the rickety ladder. You are about to enter the loft. You grip the rungs of the ladder. They are slick with grease and polished by years of hands. You climb up, leaving the cool, drafty air of the ground floor behind. With every step, the temperature rises. It's a physical gradient. By the time your head pops up over the edge of the wooden platform, the air feels thick, heavy, and surprisingly hot. You have reached the loft. In a modern house, the attic is a forbidden zone of fiberglass itchiness and discarded holiday decorations. But in your cottage, this is the penthouse suite. It is the heat trap. You crawl onto the rough planks. The space is tight. The roof slopes sharply down on both sides, meaning you can only stand up in the very center. You are intimately close to the thatch. If you reach up, you can touch the blackened straw that we admired back in Section 2, and that is why it is warm. You are sandwiched between the primary heat source, the rising air from the fire below, and the primary insulator, the roof. You are occupying the thermal sweet spot. But as you settle onto your pallet, a simple sack of straw thrown on the floor, you realize there is a catch. A stinging, watering eye catch. The smoke. In a cottage without a chimney, which is most of them until the late medieval period, the smoke from the central hearth rises to the roof and hangs there, looking for the small vent hole. It forms a smoke bay, a permanent cloud of gray smog that hovers in the rafters. By sleeping in the loft, you are essentially sleeping inside the chimney flue. You cough. The air tastes of burnt oak and peat. It is acrid, but it is warm. This is the brutal calculus of medieval survival. Would you rather cough or freeze? You choose the cough. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that medieval skeletons often show signs of chronic sinusitis and carbon deposits in the ribs, anthracosis. They were breathing particulate matter that would make a modern OSHA inspector faint. You are literally smoking yourself like a side of bacon. In fact, many peasants hung their hams and sausages from these very rafters. You are sleeping next to the meat, and by morning, you will smell exactly like it. You pull your blanket over your head, not to stay warm, but to filter the air. This brings us to a quirky fringe tidbit: the spider medicine. Being this high up, you are in the domain of the spiders. The thatch is full of them, but you don't mind. In medieval folk medicine, spiders were considered good luck and powerful healers. If you had a fever, ague, a common remedy was to catch a spider, put it in a nutshell, and wear it around your neck. As the spider died, the fever would die. Sleeping under a roof crawling with arachnids wasn't a nightmare. It was a prophylactic measure. You are sleeping in a fully stocked pharmacy. You roll over on the hard planks. The wood digs into your hip. You don't have the luxury of the box bed's feather mattress here. You are sleeping on the ropes. If you are lucky enough to have a bed frame up here, it isn't a box. It's a simple wooden frame with ropes woven across it in a grid. Over time, the ropes sag. This leads to the famous, though debated, idiom origin: sleep tight. Before you go to bed, you have to take a wooden bed key, stick it into the knots of the rope grid, and crank them tight to create a firm surface. If you don't, you sag into a hammock shape that crushes your spine. You literally have to tune your bed like a guitar before you can sleep in it. But the real sensation of the loft is auditory. You are lying directly above the main room. The floorboards, if you have them, are just rough planks with gaps between them. You can see slivers of light from the dying fire below. You can hear everything. You hear the cow shifting its weight in the byre. You hear the rhythmic snoring of your parents in the box bed. You hear the dog scratching its ear. This leads to a fascinating scholarly debate: the invention of the upstairs. Architectural historians argue that the moment we put a solid ceiling over the hall and created a proper second floor, we changed human psychology. In the open hall, everyone was together. The moment you built a loft, you created vertical segregation. The master slept downstairs. The servants and children slept upstairs. This eventually flipped in the Victorian era. Servants in the attic, masters in the bedrooms. But the vertical split began here. It was the beginning of architectural privacy, but also architectural eavesdropping. You put your eye to a crack in the floor. You can see the embers glowing red. The heat rising through the cracks is gentle now. The fierce blast of the fire is gone, replaced by the slow release of the thermal mass in the stone inglenook and the mud walls. The house is doing its job. It absorbed the energy of the day and is now feeding it to you in the night. You feel the nightcap tight on your head. You feel the scratchy wool of the blanket. You feel the smoke in your lungs. You are uncomfortable by modern standards. You are dirty. You are breathing carcinogens. You have a spider potentially repelling toward your open mouth. But you are warm. The wind howls outside, battering the snow-banked walls, tearing at the oiled paper window. It wants to kill you. It wants to turn your blood to ice. But it can't get in. You have outsmarted it. You have used grass, mud, dung, snow, and body heat to build a fortress against the winter. Your eyes grow heavy. The carbon dioxide from the fire and the cow acts as a mild sedative. The sounds of the house blur into a steady, comforting rhythm. You drift off. Hours pass. Light hits your face. You blink awake. It isn't the amber glow of the window. It's a bright, sharp ray of sunlight coming through a hole in the thatch where a bird pulled out a straw. You sit up. You check your fingers. They are pink. You check your nose. It is cold, but still attached. You survived. You climb down the ladder, stiff and sore, into the main room. The fire is dead, just a pile of white ash. The room is cold again. The frozen morning has returned. But you made it through the gap. You walk to the door and push it open. The snow has stopped. The world is blindingly white. The sun is shining on the drifts that are piled halfway up your walls. You look back at your little cottage. It looks like a lumpy, smoking mound of dirt. It is ugly. It smells. It is primitive. But as you stand there, shivering in the fresh morning air, you have a realization. You look at the modern world, or at least a future that will one day replace this. You think about the glass towers and the thin drywall and the electric heaters. And you wonder, did we actually get better at insulation, or did we just get lazy? You are about to render your final verdict. You are going to compare your mud hut to a modern apartment, and you might be surprised by who wins the thermal championship. You step back inside, stomping the snow off your boots on the threshold. The cottage is warming up again as the fire catches the fresh log you just threw on. You look around at the mud walls, the soot-stained thatch, and the pile of rushes on the floor. It is easy to dismiss this place as a hovel. It is easy to pity yourself for living in the Dark Ages. But let's strip away the chronological snobbery for a moment. Let us look at your home through the eyes of a modern building inspector or a sustainability consultant. You have built a home with zero carbon footprint. Every material in here, straw, mud, wood, dung, weeds, was harvested within a 1-mile radius. No diesel trucks brought pink fiberglass from a factory 3 states away. No petrochemicals were refined to make vinyl siding. You have achieved passive house standards. Your walls have massive thermal mass that regulates temperature swings naturally. Your roof has an R value of 25. Your biothermal heating system, the cow, runs on grass and produces fertilizer as a byproduct. You are living in an architectural masterpiece of efficiency. A mainstream historical fact you should know is that modern green building movements, like the straw bale construction revival, are essentially just relearning medieval peasant science. A modern straw bale house has an insulation value of R50, which is nearly triple that of a standard suburban home. We are currently charging a premium for eco-friendly techniques that you, the peasant, used because they were free. We call it innovation. You called it Surviving Tuesday, but there is a stark difference in philosophy. Modern insulation is designed to isolate you from the environment. We seal our houses in plastic vapor barriers and run air conditioners to fight the sun. Your insulation is designed to work with the environment. You use the snow to block the wind. You use the wool to manage the moisture. You use the cow to generate heat. Your house is an organism, not a box. However, let's not romanticize it too much. You smell like a goat. You have soot in your lungs. And if you want a hot bath, you have to heat water in a cauldron over an open fire, which takes 3 hours. This brings us to a final, quirky fringe tidbit: the warming pan revolution. As the Middle Ages gave way to the early modern period, people started getting tired of the biothermal pile. They wanted to sleep alone, but sleeping alone was cold. So they invented the bed warmer, a brass pan on a long handle, filled with hot coals from the fire. You would slide it between the sheets to preheat the bed before you got in. It was the first step toward active personal heating. It was a luxury. But it also burned down thousands of houses when the lid popped open and a coal fell onto the straw mattress. Comfort always comes with a risk. You sit down on the settle one last time. You look at the fire. This leads to the ultimate scholarly debate, the progress trap. Anthropologists and historians argue about whether our modern thermal comfort has made us weaker. By living in a constant band of 68 to 72 degrees, our bodies have lost the ability to thermoregulate. We don't produce brown fat anymore. We shiver at 65 degrees. We have become thermally monotonous. The medieval peasant experienced a daily temperature swing of 40 degrees. It was brutal, but it kept the metabolic engine revving. Are we comfortable, or are we just numb? You take a bite of the hard cheese left on the table. It is cold. You realize that your entire life is a battle against entropy. Every calorie you eat, every log you burn, every layer of wool you wear is a defiant act against the universe's desire to freeze you. And you are winning. You haven't spent a single coin on insulation. You didn't buy the thatch. You grew it. You didn't buy the mud. You dug it. You didn't buy the heat. You milked it. You are the ultimate DIY enthusiast. You are a master of the low tech. You look at the wattle and daub wall. It is cracked. It needs repair. You will fix it in the spring. But for now, it holds. You lean back against the high wooden back of the settle. The draft is blocked. The heat is trapped. The family is safe. You have built a sanctuary out of garbage. You have turned the cold, indifferent world into a warm, habitable home using nothing but your brain and the dirt beneath your feet. You close your eyes. You are warm. And in the end, that is the only victory that matters. And so, the fire in the hearth burns down to a soft, pulsing bed of embers. The orange glow fades to a deep, sleepy red, casting long, gentle shadows across the rush-covered floor. The cottage settles for the night. The creaks of the timber frame slow down as the wood cools. The wind outside, which seemed so angry just an hour ago, has softened into a rhythmic, lulling hum against the thatch. You are no longer the peasant fighting for warmth. The heavy wool itch is gone. The smell of wood smoke and livestock fades away, replaced by the clean, cool air of your own room. Feel the softness of your modern sheets. Feel the weightless warmth of your duvet. You don't need to worry about the draft under the door. You don't need to listen for the cow or check the snow level against the wall. Your thermostat is standing guard. Your insulation is silent and invisible. You are safe in a fortress of comfort that your ancestors could only dream of. Take a deep breath. Let the tension of the frozen morning melt out of your shoulders. Unclench your jaw. Let your legs get heavy. Imagine that you are still in that box bed, but without the cold. Imagine the feeling of being perfectly enclosed, perfectly protected, hidden away from the world in a small, dark, warm space. The storm is outside. You are inside. The barrier holds. Drift deeper into that feeling of security. The world can freeze, the wind can blow, but you are here, suspended in the warmth. Let the darkness wrap around you like a soft, heavy blanket. Quiet now. The work is done. The fire is banked. The night is yours. Good night, boring dreamers.